I was adopted. I never knew my real mother. Rather, I knew her at one point, but I left her side when I was too little, too unable to remember. And don't let this intro fool you, I loved my adopted family. I really, really do. I just should preface this because it's an important part of the story. My adopted family were very kind to me, and this isn't to, again, undersell them. I lived in a warm, comfortable house, and I gotta stay up pretty late, so, you know, the usual of the cool parents. Why don't I tell you about my adopted family real fast? First, there was my mother. I never called her mom or anything like that. I just called her by her first name, Janice. She didn't mind that at all, though. At all, in fact. I called her that for so long, I don't even think she even noticed. Anyhow, she was a very kind woman, and I think she is one of those people who was recommended for my adoption in the first place. Sometimes I would lay against her in front of the television, fire over the fireplace. She would tickle my back for nails. She was one of those Hollywood lovable mothers. Second, there was Dad. His real name was Richard, but he never really liked me so much. I begun to refer to him as Dad in a desperate attempt to gain his affection, but lo and behold, it didn't work. I don't think I could have called him anything. He would never love me as much as his own child. That's understandable. I didn't really press the matter. The most noticeable attribute of Dad was his unmoving sternness. He was not afraid to pop his children when they did something wrong. I found that out before I could use the restroom properly. He didn't hesitate to spank me, is what I'm trying to say. Well, I'm in line, and it's because of his methods. I guess. Lastly, there's my little sister, Emily. She was very young when I was adopted, so we were about the same age, I suppose. But she was slightly older, I think. I like to think of her as my little sister, though. We got along better than any other sibling could have possibly gotten along, and that might be due to our lack of blood relation. We would always stay up late together and just talk and talk. Well, she did a lot of the talking. I mostly listened because I loved her. It was a great setup that we had. We were short on bedrooms, so because I didn't want to sleep in the living room by myself when I was littler, I had a pallet set up next to her bed on the floor. This is where I have slept since. But to be frank, it was pretty cool to me, because I enjoyed being with her, and I had always felt pretty protective of my little sis, and I would do anything for her. However, as all good stories goes, everything seems to change with time. And for me, everything changed on a horrible Wednesday night. I was taking a nap when little Emily opened the front door. The sound of the door opening pulled me to a state of consciousness, and I walked from the room down to the hall to the living room. That's when I first remembered it. That's when I first remembered it was Wednesday. I was never good at keeping track of what day it was, in fact. Actually, I'll just go ahead and say it. My sense of time was horrible, but nevertheless, I knew it was Wednesday because Emily had just came home from her church youth group gathering. She walked in the front door and hugged me. This is followed by Dad and Janice. Have a good nap? Janice would say teasingly me as she ruffled my hair. I just shook my head away and snorted in a manner that clearly expressed I was teasing back of her. Then my father would say, "Don't you snort at your mother like that." And he would say in a very authoritarian way. He would shut the door behind him, and then he would hang up his coat. I was clearly joking, and I would say that under my breath, but I would not say that directly to him because, again, he's kind of an idiot. And also would have gotten a smack. Emily then proceeded to her room and I followed. She started telling me about her day, you know, the usual teenage girl stuff, but then I listened to that so that she would feel better. After the summary, she suggested watching TV, and I obliged and I jumped onto the couch and she was going to get the remote. She rolled her eyes at my little brother-like immaturity and scooted me over and sat down. The TV turned on, and we watched it together until the sun went down. Emily was that kind of girl. Instead of watching cartoon and soap operas, she would rather watch Discovery or Animal Planet or Natural Geographic. I liked those too, so I didn't mind. Actually, those were the only channels that could really hold my attention. So it got late, and Janice walked up behind the sofa. Emily, it's past your bedtime. Turn off the television and go to your room. You too, she pointed at me. Emily turned off the program that we were watching begrudgingly and stood up. She started down the hallway and headed into her room. As I begun to follow, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. In fact, I've this entire day I felt like something wasn't right. We went to her room. Emily turned off the light. Just as she did, I caught a flash of movement out the corner of my eye, and it was out of the window. And I couldn't think that my stepdad or my stepmom was out there. But as soon as I redirected my line of sight where the window was, there was nothing in my peripheral vision or anything in the window. What I thought I saw was gone, but I still remained alert for my little sister's sake. I laid there in the darkness with nothing but a thin ray of light from the street lamp outside to illuminate the room. It wasn't much. Time and time again, I could have sworn I heard the subtle sounds just outside the window. A twig break, a leaf crunch, clothing jostling, and all the while I could smell the faint stench of sweat and blood. Kept my eyes open throughout most of the night. The sounds outside subsided and a small smell left my nose. I began to feel at ease, and as I began to feel at ease, my eyelids closed. But not long after that, I heard a very loud smack outside of my window. I was up in an instant. There's someone in the house. I barked with extreme adrenaline running through me. Wake up, wake up! I shrilled and pleaded with Emily. She did, and soon I saw her sit up, and I ran to my parents' room. Dad. Dad was dead. His neck was splayed open and gaping as blood spilled out of it. Off the bed. Onto the floor. I saw that the master bedroom door was closed just as it was before. On the outside, there was a man. A man? I didn't feel comfortable calling it that. He was just he was very large and rugged. He turned around and saw me, and that's when I accurately, for the first time, I won't forget it. His eyes were large and beady, and was trapped with lust. He was styling a beard that was badly unkempt, with blood dripping off of it. His clothes were dirty and his face was cold. Just then I noticed the same horrid smell of sweat and blood from earlier, but this time it was overwhelming. I wanted to puke. He saw me, and he grinned with his set of crooked yellow teeth, a smile that threw me off. How could someone commit actions like this and fucking smile? I just thought that I was gonna die, but then he turned back to the bathroom, the door completely undisturbed by my presence. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I just yelled and I cried. I retched and I watched as he shouldered through the door. That was Mom's only protection. I watched as he raised a large razor he was carrying, but had obviously neglected to use properly. I watched as he sliced her open, tore her to shreds. I then heard something. The last thing I wanted to hear. It was Emily's scream from coming behind me. The large monstrosity looked up from my butchered mother and stared at my little sister. I was so distraught. He stood up and he quickly started walking towards us. My sister turned and ran, and I was at a loss when he bypassed me and went straight for her. Why was she still in the house? Had she not assumed that the situation was run and don't die? Apparently not, and now she was dead and I was alone. I ran after them both. I expected the man to kill her as he had the rest of my family, but I was sadly mistaken. He grabbed her by the arm and jerked her as a way to make it clear that he was in control. He dragged her through the house. I was making all the noise I could now, hoping, praying that someone would come to my aid. He mustn't take her. It's not her. As he passed me, I backed against a wall and I whimpered in terror. Why? Why was this happening? He didn't respond except by putting his free hand on my head while Emily screamed in the other, saying, "Goodbye, boy." He gave another crooked grin, a very cold, unnatural laugh. I followed him through the door and he dragged my helpless sister after him. He opened it, pulled her out, and slammed it shut behind him. I'm now sitting here in this house with my mutilated adopted parent shivering and whimpering with dismay, recording this. He's out there with her, doing who knows what to her. And I can't do anything. I would if I could, but I fucking can't. I would chase after them in a heartbeat, but I can't. I sit here, looking at the front door, down at my paws. If only I could open doors. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is a shorter story. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm working on the big top 30 disturbing photos. However, I hope you enjoy this tale of terror, but to be frank, I see why you would. Don't get me wrong, the twist at the end was pretty fantastic, and to be frank, this story is decently written. But here's my issue with it. The story lacks personality. None of the characters are seen as characters. The characters are seen as butchering dolls and caricatures. We got the loving mother, the uncaring stepfather, the lovable sister that is a sister who is little by virtue of being a woman. And it's, God, I don't mean to sound like I'm a feminist, but just to say, these characters aren't characters. They are just aspects, one-dimensional portrayals of things that we might vaguely know about. In fact, the story is pretty lame, after all, there's nothing really to this. But, to be frank, there was nothing good about the story, really. In fact, the only thing that was really good was the ending. And to be frank, the ending was alright, I suppose. The ending is a twist ending. But the issue is that the build-up leading to the twist ending was pretty bad. There was, again, no personality. And the only personality that there was stuff that I interjected as a narrator, because I have the right to remix the story as long as I give credit to the original material, and as long as I don't pass the remix as my own creation. But nonetheless, this story is, oh god, not very good. The ending where it turns out that the main character is a dog is a pretty awesome one. I love that. It's actually an interesting take. But the issue is that the author doesn't really do much with the idea that the main character is a dog. All he really does is, oh, look, there's sadness and whimpering, and he can't open doors, and there's no control, and I just wish I gave a shit about any of the characters, but I really just don't, to be frank. I just quite frankly don't. There are subtle hits throughout the story where he's like, I barked at the top of my lungs that there was someone in the house. I could smell people from the way back, and to be frank, I could, hear how people could actually piece of things together and be like, oh wow, really, that's how the story came to be. But that's not really good if the characters and the story itself is bad. The horror is just gross out horror and depictions of people getting cut up, and that isn't scary if I have no investment in the story to begin with. The beginning was a good start. I thought it was going to be a great story because at the beginning he's talking about how he's adopted and he's talking about his relationships with people, but that all ends because the characters aren't allowed to speak for themselves. Every character gets maybe, and I mean maybe, one line of dialogue. I don't think Emily had any dialogue, but nonetheless, it's a dog's or cat's perspective on a break-in gone wrong. And to be frank, that's stupid. It's a good story. I love it. I mean, how do I put this? I don't hate this story, but I don't love this story. It's in between. The twist ending is good. All the make for a good story is there. It's just that the story lacks enough substance for me to give a shit about anything that I'm reading. And to me, that's pretty bad. I really wish that there was more to this, but there isn't. It is the story's whole concept, the whole thing that ties it together is that the main character turns out to be a dog at the end. And to me, that's just, as a horror lover, that just because something has a twist ending doesn't make it good. I'm looking at you, M. Night Shyamalan. All in all, this isn't a creepypasta. It's well written. It's just that the text lacks personality, and the author needs to add more meat or substance for me to be invested, so that the parts that actually convey horror. Because we can't be if we're not invested, if we don't care about the characters that are being mutilated, then there's no point for us to be scared about it. So, advice to you, people who are writing stories. If you're gonna write a short story, make sure you keep the substance, or at least the substance of the content you're doing, relative to the idea that you're trying to convey. If you're doing something as horrific as a home break-in and families being taken away or mutilated, then guess what? You better make your story's length, your story's substance to reflect that. Let us get to know the characters. Let us understand what's going on. Maybe give us some build-up. Maybe give us a few nights where the guy's stalking and, you get a few sightings of that. But no, you don't get any of that. And I'd really recommend that you really limit the story to the amount of content that is in the idea. Because if you have a really good idea but you underdevelop it, it's not scary. It just comes off as a underdeveloped story for the lulz, and it makes stories that could be good, ideas that could be well done, just not interesting. And in the end, the story suffers for that. This is your host, That Creepy Reading. This was written by A.C. Johnson, and I really hope that he does not take offense to this. This is a Creepypasta of the Month winner, and thank you for writing the story. Thank you for letting us enjoy it. But I gave you my criticism. I gave the authors out there my criticism, and I highly recommend that you take it as a content fan, consumer, and narrator. This is your host, That Creepy Reading, and today I'm signing off.